The body is the gateway to presence because the body cannot be in the past and it cannot be in the future. So if you connect to your body, you can calm the mind. That opens up the mind such that you can then think about, well, what is the next best activity that I need to get done? And you're productive because you're organized.
Welcome to the Fire, Soul, and Grace podcast. I'm Dr. Kristi Tompkins, functional medicine practitioner and transformational coach. If you are looking to up-level your health in body, mind, and spirit, scale your business, improve your relationships, and create a life you love, you are in the right place. Every other week, we'll bring you a topic and feature incredible guests worldwide. Be inspired and feel empowered to live your life with greater joy, meaning, and purpose. I'm excited you're here. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Fire, Soul, and Grace podcast. I'm Dr. Kristi Tompkins, and I am really excited for today's guest. I have with me on today's show, Madelaine Golec. She is a physiotherapist based out of Canada. And I believe her specialty is pelvic floor physiotherapy. And we're going to dive into a lot of different really cool topics regarding what she specializes in, what her talents are, what her passions are. And I hope you enjoy the show. So welcome, Madelaine.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about what I know, and I love sharing what I know. So it'll be hopefully informative and exciting for the listeners.
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I'm excited as well about what we're about to talk about, because I think it's something that has been a bit in the media lately. It's something that I don't know a whole lot about. I've definitely heard about it, and I know some of my colleagues here in the United States specialize in that. So by the way, I know Madelaine through a coaching mastermind group with Dr. Megan Walker, and I think I don't know how long you've been in it, but it's been a little bit of time, and we meet randomly, collectively through Zoom, and I haven't really had a chance to talk with her one-on-one, so I'm really excited to get to know a little bit more about you on a professional level and a personal level too. Let's dive into something that I know you love to talk about, and it's something that you have immersed yourself in on a personal and a professional level, and it's called Polyvagal Therapy. So tell us a little bit more about that and how it's helped you in your personal life and professional life.
Yeah, well, let's see. I'll kind of start with how I came or how I fell into the polyvagal theory, actually. And that is through a personal therapeutic journey. So being a business owner, becoming a mom relatively early in opening my business, and I wanted to just take time to become the best version of myself, both professionally as well as a mom. So I started psychotherapy, and my psychotherapist is very eclectic and very body based versus like just a talk therapy type of approach. And so she introduced me to ideas around the nervous system, body based techniques, and of course I'm a pelvic health physiotherapist. I'm a physiotherapist, so the body very much interests me. And we study a lot on like a wider approach to health, and we study the nervous system, and we study pain neuroscience. And so a lot of psychological approaches or understanding the psychological impacts on health. It was both fascinating going through it as a client, and then learning what I'm learning, and then being like, oh, this could apply, like some of these concepts can apply to my therapeutic approach or my therapeutic understanding. And so she introduced me to the polyvagal theory. She introduced me to somatics or somatic experiencing, or that's how I had learned about it. And so then I decided to take a deeper dive into the polyvagal theory, reading Stephen Porges's books and then taking some of his online trainings. And essentially, everybody's going to be like, what's the polyvagal theory? What are you saying? Um, and so I found I've tried different ways of taking a very complex neurobiological theory and like putting it into words that people can try to understand. But essentially, the polyvagal theory is about the vagus nerve. It's a cranial nerve. It comes from the brainstem and it kind of has its own track separate from the spinal cord, which is super cool. There's one branch that goes to the front of the body that's above the diaphragm, one branch that goes to the back into the guts. And essentially, it is like the parasympathetic nervous system. So I'll tell clients, like, everybody's familiar with fight or flight response, right? The sympathetic response. And then there's the sort of rest, digest, and repair. And when I was in physio school, like, I sort of understood those two things. Like, we have one system that helps us mobilize and fight or flight, and then we have this other system that helps us rest, digest, repair, reproduce. And the polyvagal theory, what helped me understand is that rest, digest, repair, reproduce system actually has two separate branches to that. Like, it's a little bit more complex than just resting and digesting. So like, as a physio, you're talking about stress management and you're talking to your clients about like, yeah, we need more resting activities. And sometimes that's very difficult for people. And sometimes even getting into a place where you're like trying to rest creates stress, because it's when we talk about the polyvagal theory, we talk about the, we'll call it the ventral vagal. So the one that is the front of the body that is above the diaphragm is known as our social engagement system, whereas the back part of the vagus nerve is known as our shutdown. So sometimes people will, work really, really hard, right? And then they crash. And it's like, oh, I slept for 15 hours because I was so tired. I'm so rested now. And oftentimes it's that collapse system. It's like, we don't know how to get, like, there's no brake. You're just on the gas. There's no braking system to say, hey, slow down. So the system just clamps down and you go into basically, a collapse where you sleep for 15 hours. For sure, you feel better, but it's kind of like can be like a pseudo relaxing because you're not really like relaxing. You're literally like, this is the last resort to help you recharge your batteries, is like, we're going to shut it all down on purpose, right? And so that's all governed by our nervous system, and it's governed by our sense of safety, right? It's the way our nervous system developed evolutionarily was we needed more complex systems to feel safe. So, like, if we think of early evolution, how did animals kind of respond? Well, they just play dead, and as more complex systems, it's like, well, if every time I feel slightly threatened or slightly stressed, playing dead is probably not the best and only response. So we developed the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight system. So it said, okay, so here's this animal. I kind of sense some danger, some threat. It's not like, it's still over there. I'm still uncertain about the level of threat, but collapsing into playing dead is probably not the best. So I'm going to go kind of into a more alert fight or flight state. And of course, as complex humans or complex mammals, I mean, socially engaging would be quite difficult if the only responses we had were collapse, playing dead, or fighting and running away. So social engagement, like to commune with each other, to support each other, to do things as a collective would be really difficult if those were only the responses of our nervous system. So then the most newest part of our nervous system is that ventral vagus, that's that social engagement system. So it's not just the vagus, it works with other nerves, it works with other parts of the brain, and that's where it gets super complex. But to keep it simple, basically, we need a system where it's like, oh, you looked at me funny, I kind of felt a little threatened, but then you smiled at me, so then I was like, oh, okay, like there's this interaction between the system that gives me some space to decide how I'm going to react to the levels of perceived threat. So that's kind of just like a quick, easy sort of summary in terms of the evolutionary perspective. And, probably your listeners are like, but what does this have to do with health? And and so we'll kind of switch gears to say, okay, well, how does that, understanding that, how does that relate to, let's say, like pain or bladder urgency or digestion? And
I
yeah,
had a, I had a
sure.
question actually. I definitely want to hear everything you have to say. So, with regard to the social engagement, or this, it's almost like a third branch of this autonomic nervous system, not really technically, but kind of like the social engagement part. Is that activated in the presence of community, or is that something that you have to seek out yourself? Because we all know we do better in community, and we definitely have learned that in the last
Mm,
several years since the pandemic. And biologically, we are wired to be in community. We are wired to be in tribes, in circles and connections as part of a family or a unit. And maybe, millions of years ago, they didn't know that. They couldn't put it into words that they needed. But we know on a deeper level that we need people to thrive. We need community to heal. I mean, the saying, it takes a village. It really does. And you can go to a therapist on your own and get the therapy you need and go to your gym. But when you come back to your house and it's just you and you're struggling with trauma, or you're struggling from stress, or struggling from something that made you feel like a victim, you may not heal as quickly or as efficiently or as thoroughly as in community. So kind of going back to my question, social engagement, is that activated um, on your own, or do you have to go out and seek it out for it to be activated?
that's a really good question. I can't say that I'm like the expert on the complexity of that, but I can share with you, like, at least what my inklings are, what my impressions are with respect to that. So the way I think about the ventral vagal, because it is a social, like it's the social engagement system, that is something that is developed through relationship, through relation, right? When we have good attachments, right, or enough, experience with good attachment, it helps us develop that ventral vagal system. But again, it also helps us develop, the prefrontal cortex. Like, so there's multiple brain centers that are involved with when we feel cared for, when we feel safe, when we feel that we are a part of something. That helps us develop parts of our brain that can then later on, when we are alone, help us be more resilient with our stress. So I don't know that necessarily, like, I think we need people to develop that system. We need some form of good attachment and relationships to develop those parts of the system. And then once that part is more developed and thriving, then our system can be better at trusting, like having an inner sense of trust, like, oh, I'm having this difficult experience, I'm here alone, but I trust that, like, if I reach out to my sister, she'll support me. Like, maybe I don't need to reach out, but like there's there's an ability to be resilient and to stay within what's called like a window of tolerance. Like, I can be under stress and I can handle certain levels of stress depending on the resilience of my nervous system. But I certainly think that if there is an underdeveloped social engagement system due to past experiences or not enough attunement, not enough attachment, trauma, then we do need to seek out others. And that could be working just one-to-one with a therapist. It still can be developed in relation, but it needs to be in relation, right? Like it's difficult to do like self-help alone because social engagement requires other people. And that's part of stimulating those different brain areas and those different parts of the nervous system. So that's my inkling, that's the importance of community and relationship.
I think you mentioned the word resiliency, and I think just having, like you said, having that support system, or knowing, maybe not always having somebody around you all the time, but knowing that you can call on somebody, or you could talk to somebody, or confide in somebody, or a group of people. And it's that memory, it's that knowing that you have that sense of belonging, like the saying, somebody has your back, or a community has your back. And I think knowing that there's a big difference between being alone and going for a walk in nature, maybe taking a getaway trip by yourself, or doing something on your own, going to maybe doing a yoga workout, meditation, right? I mean, we often, well, you can meditate on your own. You can also meditate in a group setting as well. But there's a big difference between doing something alone as, quote, self-care, self-love, versus chronic isolation, where you're chronically alone and chronically feeling like, oh my gosh, why do I have to go through this alone? Not realizing that you don't have to. And that chronic isolation, as you and I both know, that can cause stress to the body. That can cause stress to the brain, stress to the nervous system, that in itself. But I think just knowing that you have that community, it's like tapping into that resource is almost has a calming effect to the body.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to point out as well, like I have clients who, if I suggest doing some stretches or some yoga or some meditation, they'll reflect back to me, oh no, I can't do that. Right? Because oftentimes when we slow down and we get still and we give space, then something within us comes up. And that can be a whole slew of different things. And so that's kind of like, now I'm not necessarily in the polyvagal theory, but talking about somatic experiencing here, which is another part of my training, is like we have sensations, we have emotions, we have images, we have thoughts, we have memories that might stir within us when we quiet down. And if we don't have resiliency, and we don't have, let's say, support or good coping mechanisms, then we won't sit still. It'll be too agitating to sit still, right? It'll be too uncomfortable. It will be difficult for us to do the acts of self-care because we don't feel safe enough to do so, or we don't feel we have the capacity to be with whatever comes up when I'm being still, when I'm in meditation. And so understanding from the polyvagal theory, like if I don't feel safe, if there's some perceived threat in my system, then I'm going to stay alert. I'm going to stay vigilant. It's going to be difficult for me to relax. And I'll explain it like this to my clients. Imagine you're in your treehouse, okay, up high, and there's a pack of lions that are just hanging about, but they're circled around your treehouse, okay? You have no clue if or when they might attempt to climb up that tree and attack you. So I'll say to my clients, in that space, when you're up there and you see these lions down there, do you think you're going to sleep really well? Like, are you going to sleep as deeply as possible? No, your nervous system, from an evolutionary perspective, is going to go, going to sleep could equal death, right? So you're not going to sleep well, right? You're just like, you'll either sleep light or, it'll be not as good. Is digestion going to be important? Like, is the most ideal digestion going to be important? Well, perhaps not, because the body's going to need resources, aka energy. It's going to need energy for my arms and my legs, because if that lion comes up, I'm either fighting it or I don't know, flinging myself out of the treehouse and running, right? So I need
Zip lining across to another tree.
Exactly. But that means I need to be mobilized, which means I need to be ready, which means I need sugar, I need resources, I need energy. So my brain will go, okay, what are the systems of my body right now that are not important? Because this could be life or death, right? So digestion, hormonal regulation, reproduction, like who's going to want to get like intimate and lovey-dovey? There's lions down there and they might eat me, right? So we can see from an evolutionary perspective, it makes it really easy to understand when we put it in the frame of like, being attacked by a lion or a saber-toothed tiger. And what I try to help my clients understand is that no, we don't, generally speaking, we're not facing a lion. I mean, unless you're maybe working at a zoo, but there's no lions in our day-to-day modern life. There's no saber-toothed tiger. What has happened is those evolutionary stressors of hunter-gatherer and all of those stressors shifted into modern day stressors, right? Hitting the deadline, paying my mortgage, making sure that my kids are safe at school, interacting, trying to keep my marriage alive. You could list any number of situations or circumstances where if if something happened in those circumstances, I would feel very unsafe, right? I would feel financially unsafe. I would feel uh, unsafe for members of my community. Like there wouldn't be a sense of safety within my family unit. So all of those stressors, the nervous system doesn't really know the difference. Like in terms of its response, when I perceive a threat, it thinks, oh, saber-toothed tiger, let's go into fight or flight mode, which is fine. If I'm in a peak stress moment, right? Like, oh my God, like, um, this project is due, it's due in 12 hours. I got to hustle, I got to finish it.
Yeah, it's protective. Yeah.
But then it's like we stay on, right? We stay on because after that project is done, you're on to the next project that has a deadline. And then you're on to the next project that has a deadline. And then not only that, I got to get home. I got to get my kids to this place. I got to do this. So we're in this state of like mobilization, right? And what happens is we don't have the space or the capacity or the support that we need where we can relax and truly engage socially and feel that we can trust that life is going to be okay, right? Like, how do I lean into or feel into? Okay, you know what? I'm just going to take, an hour to go for a nice walk in nature. This project, I'm certain it'll get done. And you know what? If I need to, I'll reach out to Sue and we'll get this project done, but I need a break, right? We generally, well, some people might do that. A lot of people won't. They'll just push, 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 and then they crash. And that crash is that dorsal vagal response. It's the collapse, it's the shutdown. Now, if we take it to the perspective of the lion, right, there's no escaping it. It is literally attacking me, right? It's got me by the arm. So my system, and this is not a conscious thing, this is subconscious, this just happens. Nobody goes, I think I'm gonna faint now, can you just give me a second, I'm just gonna work on fainting, right? It just happens neurophysiologically. So we collapse, we play dead in hopes that this lion's gonna detach from us, go tell his friends, hey, dinner's available tonight, and I just might be able to survive. Simultaneously, my immune system's gonna flood. Endorphins and all kinds of like pain releasing agents are gonna come out because like it's gonna hurt, right? The body does not want us to hurt when we're about to die, right? So it floods us with these chemicals, right? Again, really helpful in a very specific time frame. But when we think about burnout, when we think about collapsing into, and I'm saying a depressed state, I'm not talking about depression, although that could be looped in as a physiological response, but that is literally a self-protective mechanism that says, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't see any possibility of getting out of my life circumstances, I see no possibility of my life being any better, right? Because in fight or flight, my vision's very, very narrow, right? It's about the threat. So I cannot see possibility. I cannot see a possible better future. I'm tunnel visioned, I'm overwhelmed, and I collapse. That has health consequences, right? Because then literally, like, major functions are not going to operate properly, right? So people will go into these kind of low operational states as a self-protective mechanism from overwhelm. They'll be there until they feel like they can slowly gain some energy. So we call this the autonomic ladder, right? So I'm at the bottom of the ladder when I'm in collapse. I can't get to the top of the ladder without passing through that fight or flight response. So when I come out of this numbness, because remember, in collapse, I'm flooded with numbness. So I'm kind of frozen, right? Well, when I come out of freezing, I come back into the stress of my life. And so people will oftentimes, they will move from fight or flight into collapse, fight or flight into collapse. And they don't seem to ever kind of get, or we don't get taught. Let's just put it that way. We don't get explained. We don't get taught. We're never shown different coping, different strategies. Like, that's not something we talk about in healthcare. It's like, okay, well, if I'm teeter-tottering between these systems of stress and overwhelm, how do I then move into resilience? Like, at what point do I move into thriving? And so that becomes, that's what I've taken on as a physio is like understanding, like in physio, we use a different language. We say, oh, this person is centrally sensitized. Okay. Basically means their sympathetic system is so sensitized to pain or to all these, body sensations that they get overwhelmed by their sensations and they collapse. And then they go back into the sensations and they collapse. So we'll talk about central sensitization. So I say, okay, sometimes we cannot remove threat. Like, let's say you live with somebody who you fight with, okay? And you don't see a way to, maybe get out of that situation in this moment. Sometimes we can't remove certain things, certain threats, certain stressors. Maybe I'll put it that way. We
Right
can't
away.
remove
Yeah.
certain stressors from our life. So I was interviewing somebody for my podcast back in the day when I was running it, and he said, is it better? He asked me such an important question, and it just really like changed for me. He goes, is it better to focus on removing the dangers, or is it better to focus on creating more safety? So, like, despite my stressors, how do I create a greater sense of safety? And so that has become this journey for me, like through somatic experiencing, which is a trauma-based training. It's like, how do I help my clients feel more safe? Okay, so you have this pain, right? And we know you want this pain to be gone so badly and like right this second. And oftentimes in our attempts to try so hard to get rid of something we don't like, we can actually perpetuate the symptoms. So it's like, how do I help you understand the symptoms? How do I help you understand the holding, right? You see, I need a sympathetic tone in order to grip my fists, right? I'm holding. I really don't want to feel this pain. I'm tensing around the pain and I magnify the pain. So how do we create a sense of safety for these individuals to be able to maybe position their body in a slightly different way where they don't have to work so hard? And as they slowly start to relax their body, right? And then through guided support and hands-on techniques and etc., like, are they open and do they feel safe enough to receive the therapy that I need to give? Like, how do I create that relational safety to say, okay, I'm here to help. We're going to figure this out. Like, we're going to try to make things a little bit easier. The goal is to get rid of the pain, but in this moment, we're just going to look for what's 1% better. How can we facilitate 1% better and then help you see and experience the 1% better? Because it's one thing to say, well, I feel a little bit better. It's like, well, how do you know? you feel a little bit better? Like, what are the cues in your body? Like, how do you actually experience a little bit better? How do you experience safety? How do you experience connection? Right? Because we're so busy to intellectualize it. And so my whole thing is like, how do we bring that into the experience? How am I experiencing meditation? How am I experiencing this therapeutic touch? How am I experiencing something changing in my environment, right? So it's like being able to slow down, and to slow down, you need safety because things are going to come up. And then how do I support you to meet that, to build capacity? And so, like, as you relax and start to feel like, okay, I have this pain in my shoulder, but I understand it's because I've injured my tendon. There's a healing process that the body's going to need to do, and I can't speed it up. So, how do I support myself to feel just a little bit more comfortable while my body heals, right? What foods, what things can I do that supports healing and understanding? Oh, this pain right now isn't like it's warning me. It's telling me to pay attention, but it's not it's not meant to keep us from completely doing nothing, right? Because some people get really stuck on pain and then they avoid the things that cause pain, and that gets coded in the brain as dangerous. So it's like, how do I engage with life safely and move back and forth, back and forth? So this is the work that I'm interested in, is like, how do I do this? How do, like, there's no written manual of how do you do this because every nervous system is so different. But I think if we help our clients understand a little bit better why certain systems may not be functioning, and the hardest thing is like stress management. It's like getting people to buy into why working on that system is so important.
Yeah, it's beautifully said. I love the analogy you said. You used the word ladder. And I think a lot of times, like you said, we sometimes oscillate between the sympathetic nervous system and that numbing, that frozen state where we don't know how to move forward, right? We're stuck in that trauma or the stress, or we feel like our situation is hopeless, or we're always going to be caught in that vortex or that circle. But we actually can move out of that like a ladder, or just like steps along a trail. We can move forward. And I love the fact that you are, and I think some people understand this, or they know this, that our body holds a lot of trauma. It holds a lot of pain. It holds a lot of emotions. There's lots of books written about that. And the fact that you are able to work with people on a physical level. So it's not just therapy. It's not just going and getting a massage. It's not just doing meditation on your own, although those things are incredibly helpful at alleviating the stress hormones and alleviating the tension and possibly releasing things. But the fact that you're able to work with people on a physical level, and as you work with the nervous system and the muscles and the joints and the tendons, and I mean the entire body, and you're able to kind of talk with them a little bit about maybe some of the emotions. And you said something, how am I experiencing this? So it's almost like talk therapy, but self-talk therapy. So kind of like a pseudo self-help, but also very therapeutic, actually moving them towards deeper healing. So addressing the physical and the emotional all in one. And I'm sure some people just thrive on this and love it, and they feel like they're getting an incredible amount of therapeutic benefit. And some people, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that comes up, and maybe things that come up that they weren't even expecting to come up. They didn't go in to see you because of that, but something else maybe from the age of 4, the age of 7 comes up. I'm sure you've probably seen that before.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, and like for anybody that, maybe a healthcare provider, understanding that while that may come up, and I use a lot of education. Like, I use the polyvagal theory as part of education, as part of setting intentions for exercise, for manual therapy, like staying in my scope of practice. But I will ask, like, is there an emotion present here? Is there anything that's coming up for you? And as soon as they bring in something like, oh, I have this image of me at 4, right? I don't treat that part, but I help. What it does also help with is the understanding why I'm suggesting psychotherapy, or like working with a therapist simultaneously. It's like, look, your physical, like we can see here that there's something going on between the mind, right, and the body's response. I can work on the body and help you see that, but I can't work with you in terms of the mind piece, like to go further into depth about what happened when you were 4. So the somatic experiencing, the technique, it allows me to help them see if there's anything else bound into their physical symptoms. But I wouldn't per se be treating that specifically, other than to educate them, to help them understand neurophysiologically or neurobiologically why they're, like how the emotions impact the physiology. Like that's what I want them to understand is, okay, anger's there. Okay, notice how your body tenses every, at the as you experience anger. Okay, so then I say, is it possible that not experiencing or something, when it comes up and it remotely seems like anger, can create physical tension that puts pressure on your disc, right? So like I can work on the disc part, I can give you exercise, I can do all of the physical therapy things, but like there's this emotional piece, right? You need to go and talk to somebody about that. Like you need to go work on that piece, because the back pain, right? Like tissues do heal, right? Like they do heal. They may take a boatload of time depending on the structure of the tissue, but they do heal. So after the healing period, if there's still pain happening, there's often other things that are coupled in with that like people have a hard time, like, when I talk to clients about like, maybe you should like talk with somebody about that, right? There's still this like stigma that like, oh, if I talk to somebody, there's something wrong with me. And I want to assure, like, there's not anything wrong with you. You had an experience. Your amygdala, which we call the alarm center, right? Your brain stem, which is your survival center, their job from an evolutionary perspective is to keep you safe. So if I'm in a situation where I'm with somebody and I'm in a particular environment, it would be very evolutionarily advantageous for my brain to code as much information related to that experience, such that if I come in contact with something similar, my brain is going to be on higher alert. Oh, remember that time when that thing happened? This kind of looks similar. So, like, there's the hypervigilance, right? But that's not the same right? Like that's not the same situation. It's not the same time. It's not the same place. You're a different person. And so the therapeutic response can work with those things. And I just try to help my clients, we just try to see if there happens to be anything coupled in with persisting pain. Like what else is going on here that's causing such overactivity in your immune system? Like, are you in collapse? Like, is your immune system literally trying to fight an infection that isn't here? Because I see this all the time. Client gets a UTI, then gets treated with antibiotics, then has UTI symptoms again. Cultures come back negative. Sometimes cultures are positive. Sometimes cultures are negative. They're getting treated with the antibiotics. And meanwhile, that's been stored in the tissue. It's almost as if the tissue didn't get the memo that like the actual infection is gone. And so clients will continue to feel UTI-like symptoms because it's bound in the pelvic floor, right? The fascia, the muscles get so tight, compresses around the bladder, cuts off blood flow, like creates burning sensations, because in order to pee, you need the urethra to expand. But if I'm so tense and like my system's so protective, as soon as that urine tries to enter that urethra, it cannot stretch. So there's this pressure. There's this like, I want to stretch but contract at the same time. The body's like, that doesn't feel good, and so it'll signal pain or burning because it's like, please do something. Something's not right here. But we just, sometimes clients will just continue to think that they have UTIs. And let's not forget the pelvic floor has nerves that are both like under our conscious control, but it also has sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve endings. So it responds to our nervous system. So if you're high strung all the time, you probably don't know that you're holding tightness and tension in your pelvic floor. Then you try to go be intimate with your partner. It hurts. That creates stress in the relationship. And now all of a sudden, you can't enjoy being intimate anymore, right? So it like funnels from one thing into the other. But again, you can see, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. Or I don't get the memo that says I'm safe. It's okay now. You know what I mean? So it gets tricky sometimes. Sometimes it's like straightforward
Yeah.
pelvic health, and sometimes it's like, ooh, there's something else going on here.
Yeah, it's interesting how so many people get caught up in the pharmaceutical medication cycle of I see this all the time. I just need to get another course of antibiotics and then I'll be fine. I just need to clear this infection, whether it's bronchitis, sinusitis. It's one thing if it's life saving, because sometimes we do need something that is going to save
Yes,
our
of
life, and
course.
in some cases we need, I mean, medication, surgery, there's lots of acute care necessities, but sometimes people get caught up so much in the pharmaceutical medication or even over the counter medication cycle where they just are just, I just need to do this and then I'll be fine. And then they realize, like you just said, it comes back. Because if there's an emotional connection or something that happened at the time that I always ask people, yeah, I went on antidepressants at this time, or this is when I got really sick, or this is when I got really tired, or this is when I struggled with gut symptoms. I always ask, what was happening in your life at that time? What was happening when all this came to the surface and got worse, and you realize it's now a chronic problem? Because there's almost always, I mean, there may not be one cause, but there's usually several causes that happened. And sometimes we figure that out, sometimes we don't. But kind of going back to the emotional and the nervous system and all the nerves that kind of hold that memory, and the tissues hold the memory of what happened. And until we address that, a lot of times the problem will still be present in the body without actually being released. And I think there's more information coming out about the mind body connection, certainly, but I still think a lot of people are caught up in just the physical treatment of it versus addressing the whole person, the emotion, the spirit, the physical body.
Absolutely. And so, like in physio, we call it like the biopsychosocial approach, right? You have the biology, but then you have the mind, and then you have like your social environment, right? Like, and all of those different categories, right? Like we're a nervous system, like our body is the interface with the environment. And it's picking up a ton of information all the time, subconsciously. And I just feel like we've gotten really kind of disconnected, right? This is like all up here, like the intellectual realm is like the only information that is of a highest value to us, where the body carries so much intelligence that requires presence, right? And the capacity to be present, right? If I'm in the past or if I'm in the future, then I'm not in the present moment. And there was a quote, I can't remember who it's by right now, but it's like trauma steals the present moment because it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to be in the present moment when you feel all of these things or you're worried about the future or you're in the past, right? Um, which is powerful. And that's what I mean to say. And it's not always trauma, but it can be, let's just call it stress, overwhelm, can make it difficult for us to sit down and meditate because I don't know how to turn this off, right? People say that all the time.
Well, that's, yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why they call it a meditation practice. That's why we call, we're in clinical practice. We call it a practice because, I mean, I used to be that person that could not, the scattered brain, the frenetic, the racing thoughts. And it's taken me, I mean, a good solid 2 years where I've been diligently practicing meditation. Yes, I have my days where I still am like, oh my God, I've got a million things to do. I don't have time to meditate. But I heard a quote recently that like meditation actually gives you more time. People think I don't have time to meditate, or I'm too overwhelmed, or I'm too tired, but it actually gives you more space and time. And being able to meditate 10 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever you're able to do, it does put you in that creative state, and it does put you in that safety state that you mentioned. And it does allow you to be able to put, it puts you in a really good fertile ground to possibly work towards healing. And you won't know that until you actually start practicing it.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, like, and if you're having a hard time sitting down to meditate, go for a walk first. Go for a brisk walk.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think about how our
Mm-hmm.
nervous system mobilizes us, right? Like for fight or flight, right? It's like I have all this stored energy that literally has no place to go. And this is where body based practices may be really, really helpful, like going for a walk, moving your body. And sometimes I'll like literally I will have clients stand with me in a clinic, and I'm like, okay, it's too frenetic. I'm like, let's try an experiment, and we'll stand up and we'll just start to go into like a shake, and we'll just start shaking all of this out, and I'll get them shake their arms, shake their legs, we'll bend at the knees, we'll move our whole body, and then we'll pause and we'll breathe. So as I move, my heart rate elevates, my respiratory rate elevates, my circulation starts pumping. It's almost as if I'm tricking my brain to thinking that I've just outrun a lion. And then I'm like, oh, I made it safe. Whew. All right, guys, I'm safe. So it's like sometimes we can mobilize our bodies to speak the language of the body, to facilitate our body to think, oh my God, we got away from the lion. Whew. Right? And then all of a sudden, everything kind of comes down, but it's not coming down into a collapse. Like I'm not going numb and like disengaging. It's like, whew, all right, it's safe. All right, I'm ready to go. Let's engage. Let's get back to the project. Let's do whatever, right? But the other image that came to me when you were saying frenetic or like gaining more time through meditation, it's like you have a funnel and everything's trying to get through that funnel at the same time. Nothing gets done because it's too much. But if you slow down, then it's like the body is the gateway to presence, because the body cannot be in the past and it cannot be in the future. So if you connect to your body, you can calm the mind, that opens up the mind such that you can then think about, well, what is the next best activity that I need to get done? And you're productive because you're organized, right? So like if you think of before that, it's chaos. Everything's trying to get in. But if we actually sat down and said, okay, you know what? It's safe enough for me to just sit down for 15 minutes. I trust myself deeply to get everything done, but I'm just going to meditate. I'm going to slow down in presence. Then the organizing principle, right? Chaos wants to organize itself, right? It gets organized, and then you're productive because you're like, get this done, then this, and you're efficient because you're not multitasking. You're being thoughtful and mindful of the one thing that I need to get done, right? But again, it still requires this sort of sense of trust in self to like say, it's okay for me to take this 15-minute break. The world is not going to end if, I don't get it done right this moment. To give space for organizing principle to come in, and then you go and you be effective because you're not guessing. You're just bam, getting it done. So it's like mobilizing in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. And the body wants to have order. It wants to have harmony. It wants to have that sense of structure and be productive and be mindful and be present. And I love what you said about the body is the gateway to being present. And it doesn't, well, I mean, our brain can go to the past and our brain can go to the future, but the body knows the present, the here and now. I love all of that, Madelaine. What are 3 things that you love to do for yourself that help you alleviate stress or get into that present moment?
So it's like now which one do I pick? Because
3 or
because
4.
because it depends on it depends on the context. Like if I have gotten an email that's just like wet, like I'm like heart pounding, then to decrease the stress before I deal with a stressful situation, I will literally find a quiet place where nobody's looking, and I will either get into like a boxing. I used to do kickboxing. Like I'll kind of shadow box. Sometimes I'll even go kind of animalistic where I'm like, like making sounds because I'm speaking the language of the nervous system, not the language of the logical mind. I'm saying there's this threat. Somebody's come into my email, right? And is like attacking me or perceived attacking me. So I'm going to fight as if I'm defending myself to convince my nervous system that I'm actually not in danger right in this moment. And I want to move all that energy through so that I can actually respond to the situation versus react. So that may be one thing is like, I ask myself, like, what's the threat here? What is it that my body wants to do? Do I want to defend? Do I want to run away? Do I want to hide? And I sometimes will honor what my nervous system does with with mindful presence and witnessing. So that's one thing in the like literally there's something. Aside from that, body-based techniques. So I will use like qigong. Qigong is a movement-based practice, which again is just to be mindful of the movement with the breath. So that's something that I've been bringing it more closely into my day-to-day life, is to practice that in the evening as a way of mobilizing through a movement of safety because it's time to go to bed, right? Um, and then I'm physically active, so one of the best things is exercise. My form of exercise is Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and it requires absolute presence because somebody is literally trying to choke me or break my arm, so I better be present to where is my body, what is my body doing. So I like doing body-based techniques as a way of moving the stress through as a means of presencing. So those are like body based examples of what I do to work with my body. And then, of course, I do meditation, I do journaling, which is more of that like safe, calm activity. So I try to combine aspects of both mind practices and body practices.
Yeah, and I think knowing who, not only knowing who you are and what you need, because I'm somebody that likes I need to do movement because you mentioned the word mobilize and movement and release those stress hormones or get out your aggression and do shadow boxing or scream in a pillow or whatever you need to do or go take a hike in nature and go scream out to the trees, whatever you need to do to release that. And then, yes, there's a time and place for meditation. There's a time and place for, I love to cook. That's very calming for me. For some people, they like to paint or they sing or they dance. I think I saw somewhere on your website, you like to dance too, in addition to the jujitsu. So those are all excellent ideas. I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Madelaine. I've loved this conversation. I think more people need to hear this. Where can people find you online?
Well, I am on Instagram. So that's my name, at Madelaine Golec. And you'll probably, I don't know, do you do show notes? Because spelling my name
I
is
do.
really like,
I will.
people can't, I get
We'll put it
all
in. Same.
kinds of variations of spelling of my name, but it's at Madelaine Golec. You can find me on TikTok. So the two most active places is TikTok and Instagram at Madelaine Golec. And that would be like related to my pelvic health practice, my physiotherapy side. I do somatic coaching as well, and that's just like more for like entrepreneurs. Like, how do we stay present and not get overwhelmed in business? And it's the same conversation. The difference being we're not talking about health; we're talking about like business and wealth. Same principles, same system, same approaches apply. And that's on Instagram, BQ for business at BQ. BQ being, body intelligence, kind of like EQ and IQ, but BQ
I love that.
for business.
We'll have you on again. Yeah, we'll have you on again because I know I want to talk about that, and we just are out of time today. But I would love to talk about the business side of what you do and how you can integrate that to grow your business, to scale it, to really nurture it so it becomes something that you love, and it's thriving. So again, thank you
so much.
Thank you, Madelaine. It's been a joy. The views and opinions expressed in this program are solely those of the host and the guest and are not intended to provide, nor are they a suitable substitute for professional care by a doctor, therapist, mental health professional, or other qualified medical professional. Thank you for listening to the Fire, Soul, and Grace podcast. Share this episode with someone in your life. Subscribe to this podcast so you can hear more valuable content on how to live your best life. Be sure to connect with us at firesoulandgracepodcast.com, and please join us in the next episode.